I would say, even in Newcastle's current predicament, bearing in mind it was at St James's Park, this, you could argue, was, this was the surprise result of the day. I mean, I suppose Luton going to Sheffield United was huge, but they're two relegation sides. Nottingham Forest going up there, manage your second game in charge at St James's Park. This is a big shock and a big result for Forest.
And you can only make so many excuses, can't you?
Yeah, and it's the truth. Listen, while that truth still holds, that Newcastle United are simply exhausted, you only have to look at the first goal that came just before the break. When Elanga breaks, if you look at Bruno Guimaraes and Lewis Miley, they have no legs to even attempt to keep pace with Nottingham Forest. So while, yes, Newcastle are tired, they don't have the legs, for all the reasons that we've been discussing for many a week, at some point that style has to, your approach has to adjust. It has to take that into some kind of account. If your midfield is as exhausted as they are, you cannot keep pressing as high up the park as you do. You cannot play this high defensive line knowing that the midfield can't close spaces down in the midfield, and more times than not, it's just going to be a free clip in behind the back four to allow players to run in behind. So those two things, again, you have to make those adjustments. And while we sat here and kind of praised Pochettino for taking that similar aggressive style, even though he had injuries, it's different for Newcastle United. It's different for Eddie Howe. He's been there a whole lot longer. And you can make those adjustments without really compromising who you are. You're standing with the team. I just feel, given all their issues, there has been no attempt to adjust accordingly.
This story will change quickly for him.
Very much so. Yeah.
It'll change. Sorry, Frank. It'll change very, very quickly for him, because the sympathy and the empathy is starting to fade. And nobody's denying that, for the most part, the job he has done there is a really good one. But we're in the modern game now. It's here and now, and their performances in his in-game management is starting to be questioned.
Right.
And tactics and how he approaches it. And he's going to have to turn this round, because he's got an ownership that, is going to be very demanding. And I think this is worrying for him. And a month ago, I probably wasn't on that page. But I think in this league, and I think that's why Unai Emery, when we discuss Villa, is going to be at his players, because the narrative turns very quickly. Not that Unai Emery is under pressure, he's not. But they could quickly drop out of, being afterthought for the top four, with Tottenham and all the rest of them. And I think from Newcastle's perspective, if he doesn't stop this ship, which currently is sinking a little bit, then there's going to be a lot of questions. A lot of questions about Eddie Howe going forward.
Do you think Steve will admit they've regressed yet?
No, of course not.
Go on, Frank.
Yeah, I just want to say that, everybody thought, that it's bad luck for Newcastle, and everybody has sympathy for Eddie Howe and the Newcastle players and the list of injuries that they have there. Okay, that's a fact. But maybe you can wonder why they're so much injured. Why they have a list of so many players not being able to play. I remember at my time, where Arsenal had that time of players also injured. I don't know if you remember, guys. The medical staff was targeting, and maybe it's the time to find why so many players are getting injured. It's not because of the World Cup was a year ago. Is it still that? Where I was said no. Maybe the physical staff or maybe the medical staff don't do their job. Doesn't do their job. Doesn't do their job, and they have to maybe try to find where the thing has gone wrong in that matter. Maybe they prepare too much. They work too much in the preseason last summer. Maybe when they have players who are getting a little bit injured, the medical staff doesn't do the job. But there might be a reason why you have that list of players not being able to play.
But whatever way you butter this was still a strong Newcastle side today.
Right.
And recent weeks he's had a weak bench. It's not his strongest bench, but it wasn't a weak bench today. He had experienced players on there. Callum Wilson was on the bench. Livramento was on the bench. There was others, experienced players on the bench. It's not like he was playing his old 3 goalkeeper on the bench trick again, which he's done before, looking for a little bit of sympathy. So he had a strong 11 and he had a relatively strong bench. So that argument is going to start to falter because people will turn around and say, well, hold on a minute, you know, you've got European football, but there's a lot of other teams that are tired.
Yeah. I think to that point, I think playing European football for the first time in nearly 20 years, it's a bit of a learning curve, and that's what they're experiencing. But and I think in today's game against Nottingham Forest, I believe Eddie Howe's thinking is some of these players need a rest. You can start with Livramento on the bench, but then you try to make changes. But at this point, the game is gone. Again, for me, it's these next few weeks, and Newcastle have a horrid run of games to come, but they are so key to not just Newcastle's season, but to Eddie Howe. I just feel that you've got to adjust, given your personnel, whether everybody's fit, whether everybody's tired, whether they have the pace to match up against. And I just don't think there's been any kind of adjustment. Albeit you come up against Nottingham Forest thinking, yeah, today of all days is a day I can rest and rotate players. But no, you don't adjust accordingly. Look what happens.
How bad a PSG can't even beat Newcastle, Jules? Anyway, just a reminder, ESPN FC. Yeah, go on.
No, just quickly, because Shaka mentioned it, they play Liverpool, City and Aston Villa next in the Premier League, and Sunderland away in the FA Cup in one of the biggest derbies in England, of course. So things could get worse before they even get better for Eddie Howe and Newcastle.